I almost didn't review this one because I assumed that it would be sold out. Because this stuff, I bought it when it's released about 18 months ago, and I assumed that it'd be long gone and it would be of limited interest to you guys because you can't buy it. Apparently I was wrong. This stuff is sold out from the English Whisky Company direct, but there are several websites where you can still buy this. The first one that came up when I looked was Whisky Exchange, not a sponsor, but they do still have quite a bit of this if you wanted to try it. So here goes. This is the English Whisky Company Heavily Smoked Sherry Butts. So as you might have guessed, being in the white box, this is a step down from the red range. It's part of the small batch release lineup range. So the small batch whiskies from English Whisky Company in the white boxes with the coloured panels on the front, they are a step above the entry level original smoky sherry cask, and I guess a small step up from the 11-year-old in the yellow gold box, but a step below the red range, which is the single cask string stuff in the red boxes. In my humble opinion, I think that the small batch range, which usually sells for about £60-ish, depending on what they do vary a little bit. In my opinion, they are the best mix of quality and value for money for anyone that's looking to try English whiskey. They are really where you should be looking if you've never really tried the English Whisky Company whiskey and you're curious to try it. Or if you're just looking for a standard bottle of whiskey of good quality to enjoy without having to spend too much. As with, I think, all of the small batch stuff. And to be fair, to a credit to the English Whisky Company, it was only when they started coming out with the entry level stuff that they bottled anything below 46%, even in the early days when they were selling like 3-year-old whiskey like your Chapter 5 and 6 and all that stuff. It was all 46 plus, and this one being part of the small batch range, it is bottled at 46% as well. We're told that this is from a vatting of 2,132 casks, so it is a small batch, much smaller than a lot of small batches that you get from the larger distilleries, and the batch code on my bottle is SB223. This is technically a no-age statement release, but because it's got a distillation date and a bottling date on it, being distilled in June 2011 and bottled in January 2023, we know that this whiskey is 11 years old and 7 months. We're also told that it's matured in first fill sherry butts and peated to an eye-watering 65 ppm. Interestingly, English Whisky Company still haven't ironed out all of the bugs. We are told that it's non-chill filtered on the box. It doesn't say anything about non-chill filtration on the label, which is really disappointing. And it doesn't say anything about natural colouring anywhere, even though 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, when the English Whisky Company first started putting whiskey out, they used to put natural colour and non-chill filtered on everything, and they've stopped doing it. A lot of people will say it doesn't matter. I think it does. A lot of people think that it does. It just allows us to keep them honest. It allows us to rest assured that they've not started doing anything untoward. There's no need to ask any questions. You just know. So I would like to see those guarantees on the label. Anyway, let's get some in the glass and see if it's any good. Standard presentation that you get with all of the red range and the small batch. Very classy white and gold box. Hopefully that will focus so you can actually see it. You can do it. Come on. All the details on that front panel there. Lovely gold accents on the white field. Very classy. Much nicer than the old presentations that we used to get. And wonderful presentation on the bottle as well. Don't know who they got to do this. I'm sure Jeff Whisky would have a lot to say about this presentation. I think that it's absolutely stunning. The only problem that I do have with these bottles, these decanter style bottles, is that I've had quite a few of them. I've tried I've had a bottle of almost everything that the English Whisky Company have ever released, and I've got lots of these things, and they're a hefty bit of glass, and it just seems like a massive shame even to recycle them. So I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Absolutely beautiful presentation, but also maybe a little bit wasteful, a little bit excessive when we're thinking in terms of green issues and the planet and sustainability and all of that. Anyway, it's whiskey. None of that negative stuff. Lots and lots and lots and lots of sherry. And it's very bright and sweet, orangey sherry, but also with a distinct caramel chocolate note in the sherry as well. So bright and sweet, orangey. Also with a little bit of a mustiness, a bit of a musty dunnage sherry note. Lots and lots of maltiness mixing in with those chocolate caramel notes. Oily and greasy malt. Buttery malt. I think we know that this one is about 12 years old, and it's only 46%, but it really carries the age well. It shows the maturation and the quality of the maturation and the casks and the malt really, really well. I think that a lot of people could mistake this for being a handful of years older than 11. And the key part of why I say that is that buttery, oily, slightly waxy maltiness. It's something that most distilleries don't get at 11 years old. It kind of makes me think of the kind of notes that a lot of people talk about coming from worm tub distilleries, which kind of proves my point that I don't really believe that worm tubs do as much as a lot of people say they do, because the English Whisky Company don't have worm tubs. But yeah, meaty, buttery, oily, greasy, lovely maltiness. And that works really well with the peat, because this stuff is peated to 65 ppm, which is really up there. So we can expect a lot of peat on this one. And while I don't think this is a vulgar peat bomb, because you have got that sherry influence as well, which balances and tones things out really nicely, the peat is very much there. And I think that the fact that I've gone for a 65 ppm peated malt on this one, I think that's what's allowing that peat to stand up and really fight for control against that sherry influence. I think that if you had like a 30 to 40 ppm malt, you probably wouldn't, or you definitely wouldn't get the peatiness coming through as much as you do on this one. Really nice balance where you're seeing both sides of the story. And it is a real dirty, slightly industrial and fumey peatiness on the nose of this one. Burnt, smoky peat, and also quite medicinal bandages and salves. I've been to the English Whisky Company several times, and I think they probably tell their tour guides to say this. They say that the peat that they use is not the medicinal TCP peat that you get on a lot of Scotch. It's different. But I disagree. I think that it really is quite medicinal, which is a good thing. We all love our heavily peated whiskey here, don't we? I bet almost everyone watching this does. Fumy and burnt, smoky peat, a little bit of wood smoke, but very medicinal. Also a little bit of a hint of wine gum on the nose of this one. And I think that's probably just coming through from the fruity esteriness of the English Whisky Company base spirit. Whenever I say wine gum, it's always with a little bit of a sigh, because wine gum is something that I always get from STR casks, and I'm not getting it to the extent with this one that I would from an STR cask, because I really don't like that sort of chewy, jelly, fruity, sweet note that you get on those heavily oaked and doctored STR casks. This one's not like that. It's more of a background note, just a little accent. I think it's very sherry forward. You get that wonderful, beautiful, orangey, sweet sherry and the caramel and the chocolate. And then as it progresses, it moves into the peat with the slightly coastal, medicinal and burnt and fuminess, with that very well matured maltiness on the journey. But it really transitions on the nose, I think, from that wonderful sweet sherry to the chocolatiness, and then the peat. Earthy, peaty wood smoke. So a wonderful journey and progression on the nose of this one. Let's see how it tastes. I think that the palate really reflects the nose in both the flavour profiles and the progression as well. I think that early on, the arrival on the palate is a little bit timid. It is light at first, and that's possibly because this is a 46% whiskey, and me personally, I've been tasting a lot of the red range whiskies from the English Whiskey Company lately, so I've really been spoilt with a lot of cask strength stuff. And in comparison, this one does start off light, but it gets going soon enough with a really good growing intensity, starting off with some chewy oak and some milk chocolate and caramel notes. Beautiful sherry up front. You can tell that it's obviously been must have been a first fill sherry cask they've used on this one. So more of those orange wine gums growing into a really intense orangey maltiness that once it gets going, it really seems a lot more than 46%. And just with the nose, late on the palate, as it was late on the nose, that peat comes in, adding just that extra hit of extra body and power. And the peat on the palate, I'm getting lots of spicy wood smoke, a little bit of a barbecue note, a little bit of a medicinal note, but perhaps not as much as there was on the nose. Some smoked ham and a little bit of a kind of spicy, oaky, mesquite smokiness. Let's have another sip and look at the finish. That wasn't intentional, but it's almost exactly the same colour as my top. Beautiful colour, beautiful sherry. As for the finish, I think that it's getting more medicinal. After you swallow and you get the sort of those retro flavours, you're getting more of that medicinal smokiness, more salves and bandages, quite a bit of chewy oak, perhaps a little bit of sort of restrained, well-controlled European oakiness, as well as some really nice smoky cereally malt notes. So I really like this one. It's difficult to hide. It is a fantastic whiskey, and I think that these heavily sherried releases from the English Whiskey Company are really, really good, because I've reviewed a similar one to this one before. Some people might not click on this video because they might think that it's an old review, because there was a previous one probably a couple of years ago now which was just called Sherry Butts, English Whiskey Company Sherry Butts, and it was basically this. I think it was possibly very slightly younger, and it was the unpeated counterpart of this, and I loved that stuff. I absolutely bigged it up to hell, and I don't think anyone really listened to me, because Whiskey Tube, as wonderful as it is, I think unless you somehow convince the rest of Whiskey Tube to bang their drum to the same tune, or if you're praising something that's got a big marketing department behind it, then yeah, you can kind of influence people. It's like the Ralphie effect, isn't it? To really influence what people buy, you either need to be Ralphie or you need to jump on bandwagons. Because the unpeated version of this, I gave it a really, really good review. It was back when I was giving grades, and I probably gave it like an A- or something, so I really loved the stuff. And the few people that told me, that got in touch and said that they'd bought a bottle on my recommendation, I heard such good things. Lots and lots of people really enjoying that stuff, and it's an absolute shame that it's gone. And I'll absolutely buy a bottle of that unpeated, heavily sherried one if they release another batch, because it was superb. But it's a little bit frustrating for me as a YouTuber that more people didn't get on board with it. Because it was around for quite a long time, and I mentioned it at the Oswars, but the way that the Oswars work, all of the contributors get together and put things forward. And unless other people have also tried that thing and they sort of confirm your vote, it ends there. And it's the same thing with the English Whisky Company, that they just don't seem to have the exposure and the hype that a lot of other English whisky that a lot of other distilleries have. They're just not talked about. I don't know if they need to pay their marketing department more, perhaps. Maybe not as much as Ardbeg, but somewhere in the middle. But yeah, just a little aside there. A little bit of my experience. I do find it a little bit frustrating that I pick these things up and a few people take my advice and go for it. I heard really good things about the unpeated one, people really enjoying it. But by and large, these releases from the English Whisky Company do kind of go unnoticed. There is one thing that I am a little bit unsure about with this one though. And I've kind of touched on it already with my mention of the unpeated version of this. And that's the peat in this whisky. You know me, I love a peated malt, but I can't help wondering how necessary the peat was as an aspect of this whisky. And thinking back to the unpeated version, which looks almost exactly like this, I think I've still got the absolute dregs of it somewhere. I think I kind of enjoyed the unpeated version more. As much as I love peat, I just feel like it wasn't entirely necessary, because I think that the malt and the sherry from English Whisky Company is just exceptional as it is. That absolutely shouldn't let us detract from this one though. It works really, really well. It's very well integrated. And as I said before, the fact that it's a 65 ppm peated malt allows that peat to not just be walked over by the sherry. It's the perfect balance, and it makes for them really nice complexity, and they absolutely don't clash at all. I think that you get great flavours from the malt, great flavours from the sherry and the cask and the peat. I think that this stuff is very well made, very, very nice, and an absolute steal at the price that they're asking for. So, what is this like, and who is it recommended to? I would say that this actually reminds me a little bit of like the peated and sherried Benromachs that I've had. In particular, there was one quite a few years ago, I think it was a 2009 vintage, and that was a much younger whisky, and you could tell the Benromach doesn't have the finesse and complexity and finish and polish that this one does, but I think the style of whisky that you get from Benromach from a peated and sherried Benromach is quite similar to this. Another thing that is going to surprise a few people and might annoy some people is that I think that this kind of ticks a lot of the same boxes as the Port Charlotte 18. And that's not just me being controversial. Well, it is me being controversial, because I like to do that. But the Port Charlotte 18 I reviewed very recently, and I was disappointed with that one for the age statement and the astronomical price and the fact that it's Bruichladdich and they really should be doing amazing things. I feel like I did not get anywhere near my money's worth out of that bottle, and I absolutely won't be buying a second one. But I think that this one with the peat and the sherry, it ticks a lot of the same boxes for me. It's not cask strength, and I wish it was. But apart from that, it treads a similar path. And this stuff, as I said before, it is, like 11 years and 7 months, I think I said. So it's not overly old. It's a long way off being 18 years old. But they do say that English whisky in the slightly warmer climate than Scotland does age faster. And yes, but no. But I think that this stuff is very, very mature for that age statement. I think that it tastes a lot more mature than 12 years old, whereas that Port Charlotte 18, I think that the amount of pissing about they did with all the different casks left it not quite shining as brightly as I think an 18-year-old whisky should. So I think they kind of meet in the middle. Another thing you have to consider is that the batch size on this one, I think the batch size on this one compared to the Port Charlotte 18 is about a third of the size. So even though Bruichladdich will talk your arm off, as I'm doing now, about how amazing their Port Charlotte 18 is and how it's a small batch, 3 times bigger than the batch size on this one. This is true craft integrity, boutique, handmade whiskey. And last but not least, the obvious thing to compare this to is the English Whisky Company Sherry Butts release, the unpeated version of this. I think that if you tried that one and you liked it and you like peated whiskey, then by all means go for this one. Because I do think, although I think that the unpeated one, I kind of preferred it a little bit, this one is a very similar thing, and as long as you like a little bit of peat with your sherry, you'll love this one too. Just going back to the marketing, or lack of marketing, with this stuff. The English Whisky Company, the best kept secret in English whisky, whether that's a good thing or not. I have to mention that another fairly recent release from the English Whisky Company, the Sherry Cask release in their core range, which is kind of in this colour box, purpley box, but it's all purple. It recently won an award for the world's best single malt whisky at the World Whisky Awards 2024, which is a phenomenal achievement, and absolutely hats off to English Whisky Company for getting that. And I really hope that gives them some exposure and helps them on their way and helps spread the word that English Whisky Company are producing fantastic whisky these days. Between you and me though, when it comes to the world's best single malt whisky, that English Whisky Company Sherry Cask, the core range one, between you and me, we all know that awards are bullcrap, and that Sherry Cask release is not the best single malt in the world, because it's not even the best single malt from the English Whisky Company. It's not even the best heavily sherried single malt from the English Whisky Company. But we all know the problems with awards and how that they don't really mean that much. But hopefully it will get their name out there and result in the continued success of the English Whisky Company. Let me know what you think about this one if you've had it, and if it sounds good to you, move now because it's sold out with the English Whisky Company themselves. But if you act quick and you've got access to things like the Whisky Exchange and Master of Malt, things like that, you will still get a bottle if you move now, because I've really been enjoying it. Wonderfully complex, wonderfully balanced, excellent small batch whisky. Thanks for watching, see you next time, cheers.
Mm-hmm.